What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining me this week. Now, if you're somebody who goes to jam sessions, you probably have strong feelings about the tune we're about to work on today. Maybe you love this tune, feel like you can always feel confident on it. Maybe you hate this tune, think it's like one of the most overplayed standards sort of in the oeuvre of jazz. However you fall on that spectrum, you cannot deny that the concepts that we can learn by practicing There Will Never Be Another You can help us on all the different things that we need to do as improvisers. Cool, let's dig into stuff. Now, today's lesson is not going to be an all-encompassing practice guide to this tune. There's a lot of things you could work on when you're working on this standard. We are going to talk in 3 different levels. Something that would be great for a beginner on this tune, something that would be great for someone who's maybe more in an intermediate place with their playing, and then something that is great for a student who's a little bit more advanced, a little farther along the path. One thing we are not going to discuss today is we're not going to do an in-depth harmonic analysis. There is a lot of those resources all over the place online, and rather than pile this video on top of all those, I thought we would discuss some actual things you would do sort of after you've done that step. You need to know harmonic analysis, and if you're not so confident on that, check out some of the other videos, or we will discuss that a little bit in this week's Patreon lesson, the stuff that's in the virtual studio, where there will be some harmonic analysis. So if you need that support, check out those resources, but we will not do that here today. So our level 1 concept that we're going to talk about and that you should practice if you are working on this tune is the concept of playing thirds and sevenths through the chord changes. So when we talk about playing thirds and sevenths, we create exercises that sound like this. Now, not a lot of flash there. In all honesty, kind of a boring exercise, but what it does do and what it helps us to learn and hear is the through voice leading of any set of changes. Now, some chord progressions are going to have more of this, some of them less, where we have these through lines. This song, because it is based on 2-5-1 progressions, is going to have a lot of good voice leading that is created by thirds and sevenths. So let's just break down this music theory a little bit. It's really important to understand this, even though it is a little bit technical. To really understand what's happening here, we have to understand the circle of fifths. So when we're moving clockwise around the circle of fifths, we are adding sharps and we are ascending by fifths or descending by fourths. When we're going the other direction, counterclockwise, that's the direction that we care about. We are either descending by a fifth or ascending by a fourth, however we slice it. But that way, counterclockwise, that creates all of our 2-5-1 progressions. So say we're at the very top with C, we move around to F, we move to B flat. If we put those 3 together and thought that B flat was our target, we would get C is 2, F is 5, B flat is 1. That works all the way around the circle in these little chord chunks, 3-note chunks. Those are the type of progressions that we are looking for that are going to create smooth voice leading. So with these thirds and sevenths, I should say. So if we don't have that type of progression where we're moving these steps around the circle of fifths, we are not going to have this smooth voice leading. So let's just look at an example in our actual tune. Let's look at the first 4 bars, or maybe 5 bars, I should say. So we start with E flat major 7. That is our 1 for this tune in general and for this kind of harmonic moment. When we go to bar 3 and bar 4 and bar 5, we have a D to a D to a G to a C. So that is one of our circle of fifths progressions. So that is a 2-5-1 to C. Now we know what a C is the tonic because G is the dominant chord, and that dominant chord really tells us that the next chord is likely resolution. Not always, but likely. So when we look at our thirds and sevenths through these couple of chord changes, when we go from the ones that are in E flat, moving to the D chord. For the E flat chord, we've got a G and a D. Then on the D chord, we have an F and a C. So if we went G to D and then jumped down to that F, the third of the D chord, we don't get smooth voice leading because those 2 chords don't move in this circle of fifths fashion. Now, if we move from the D to the G, we think about the 3rd and the 7th of D. That's an F to a C. And then that resolves to the 3rd and the 7th of G. The 3rd of G is a B natural. The 7th is an F. So we get this nice half-step resolution from the 7th of the 2 chord to the 3 of the 5 chord. And then it would resolve forward on the C chord to the 3rd of the C chord, the E flat. So whenever we have these thirds and sevenths, whenever we have these circle of fifths progression, our thirds and sevenths are going to work really well to give us a good harmonic outline of what's going on in the tune. Now, the vast majority of songs have a mix of some places where we have this smooth voice leading that's created by this exercise and this way of thinking about harmony, and some places where it's less smooth, just That's just kind of how harmony works when we're talking about quote unquote functional harmony. So we throw this into a really meat and potatoes sort of exercise where we're just playing half notes to kind of connect with some of this smooth voice leading that's happening throughout the entire tune. As I said, pretty dry. It's a great way to understand harmony. It's a great way to play long tone exercises for us as brass players, especially really work on your sound. Good way, you can kind of sneak in a little bit of improvisation practice during your warm up. But we want to be able to actually turn that into music. You can use these as a real guide to make melodies by thinking about those close resolutions, by adding a little bit of rhythm, adding some space, maybe adding a few extra passing notes or chord tones, and you can create some relatively convincing solos. It can get pretty limiting pretty quickly, and I've actually talked about that in a handful of lessons in the past, but this is an absolutely essential practice exercise. If you are not working on this on tunes already, you should be. It really, really helps you understand how 2-5-1 works. So if we threw this into a more musical setting, we might end up sounding like this. Onto our second level of practice for this tune, kind of a more intermediate concept. This has to do with how we navigate the 2-5-1s in this tune. Now we have a mix of both major and minor 2-5-1s, and that's really what I want to discuss today. We talk a lot about working 2-5s on this channel, different licks, different approaches for composing licks, stealing licks, applying licks, all that sort of stuff. For me, it's an important part about building vocabulary, but I sometimes find my students, both high school age students and some of my adult students, struggle when we have to shift between a major 2-5 that we might already know and we want to apply the same idea or a similar idea on a minor 2-5. Let's see how this would play out on this tune as just sort of an example of how we might want to work this problem. So this tune is in the key of E flat. So we're definitely going to have a 2-5 in the key of E flat. So it's going to be an F minor 7 to a B flat dominant 7 to an E flat 7 and E flat major in this case. So let's try to apply this lick there. Pretty straightforward 2-5, arpeggios, some just scalar motion, hitting the chord tones, that sort of thing. We want to think, all right, if I want to apply this lick on the minor place, how do I do that? The first thing you've got to do is really understand the difference between a minor and a major 2-5. So we just said this was a major 2-5, F to B flat to E flat. Where we have a minor chord in this tune that is set up by a 2-5 is the C minor chord. So we first have to identify D to G to C, that's our 2-5, but also that the chord qualities change here. So if we look at these back to back, in our major 2-5, we have a minor to a dominant to a major chord. In our minor 2-5, we have a minor 7 flat 5 to a dominant again, but with some alterations, a G7 flat 9 chord, and then eventually to C minor. So we have to identify which one of those notes need to change when we make the transposition to the new key. So I would start by analyzing a little bit our first lick. So if we look at our lick going to E flat major, and we give it some sort of scale degree analysis, let's just look at the first measure. We start on the flat 7, down to 5, down to flat 3. We go to the 9, the G, and then back up the arpeggio. If you want to think about it in a more streamlined way, you could just think it's an arpeggio from the flat 7 going down and then going back up. So we know when we go to minor that this 2 chord becomes a minor 7 flat 5. So wherever we have a 5 in this lick, a 5th scale degree on that 2 chord, we have to make it a flat 5. So if we transpose all this stuff into the key of C minor, we're going to end up with this version of the lick. Now, a couple things changed. In the 2 chords, all of my 5ths became flatted 5ths. They became A flats in this context. Now remember, when I talk about a flat 5th, I'm talking about it as compared to the key of D, that key of the moment. The other thing about that chord that changed is rather than going to the 9, where I turned the corner of the bottom and went back up, I just went to the root. So there's a couple ways you can think about how a 9 plays on a minor 7 flat 5 chord. It could be a natural 9, it could be a flat 9. It depends on sort of how you approach conceptualizing a 2-5-1 in a minor key. If you want to think 6 melodic minor, it's going to be a natural 9. If you want to think the whole key area is in C minor, it's probably going to be a flat 9. I just avoided that problem by making it a root. So there's a lot of kind of flexibility there. And you listen to 5 different people play, they're going to play it a couple different ways. And so that's not what we're talking about today, but just be aware that sometimes when we move from a major to a minor, we have to subtly change things to make it fit better. The same thing happens when we go to the 5 chord. This 5 chord has some flat 9s in it. So whenever there was a natural 9 back in major, I've got to turn it into a flat 9 to make it happen here. The same thing might be true when you get to the resolution chord. If you were ever hitting the major third on your first lick that was a major, you'd have to change it to a minor third when we get to this minor chord. So being able to shift your ideas from major to minor is really, really important so that we can get the most out of the stuff you're working on. And when you're hearing a particular idea or particular shape, you can easily make that transition into minor without having to feel like I've got to learn this whole new lick. That's kind of the key here. So your ideas that you're hearing in your head can kind of flow out of you easily. Now, to practice this, I would just do absolutely classic plugging in the 2 5s in their necessary places. So we have 3 2 5s in this tune. We have a 2 5 1 to C minor. That'll be the first we encounter. Then a 2 5 1 to A flat major. That'll be the second one. And then at the end of the section we're going to work through, we do have that 2 5 1 to E flat. I'm literally going to plug in the 2 5s, transposed from major to minor, all that kind of good stuff, and just rest for the rest of it. That is where you want to start when you're working on kind of cramming these new ideas into your playing. Waiting for that first 2 5. Next one. Now I've got a long wait before I get to the one in E flat. On to our final concept for today. This one is a little bit more advanced, at least from a harmonic standpoint, but it actually only affects a very small chunk of the tune. So where we want to think about this concept is in the third phrase of the first half. So if we look at the changes here, we have an F dominant 7th chord moving to an F minor, moving to a B flat. So basically we have a dominant 2 chord moving to a minor 2, then to a 5, then to a 1. This is a very, very common harmonic gesture in many, many standards, and that's why it's a worthwhile thing to think about what we might want to play here. That dominant 2 to a minor 2 to eventual 5, really, really common. So when we see that gesture, I really love to think about those dominant 2s as actually being a dominant sharp 11. So F7 sharp 11 or Lydian dominant, however you want to think about it. There are a lot of cool sounds that you can access by getting your brain thinking in that direction. We are going to discuss the so-called flat 6 pentatonic and how we apply that in this case. So just a little side note, the last video I released was all about minor major sounds. These are very interrelated. I'll throw a card up in the corner. That video actually didn't get a ton of views. I was really surprised because I thought it was actually a really useful thing. So maybe if that one slipped by you, hit the card, go back and watch that one because I think there's a lot of cool ideas in that video. Just for whatever that is worth, for whatever reason, it just didn't quite land with viewers when I originally released it. But either way, we're talking about flat 6 pentatonic. So what we have here is we're actually going to do a G flat 6 pentatonic. We're talking about why that is in a second. But when we do this, we get this sound. I would say it's kind of harmonic major almost. What we have is a major pentatonic scale, G, A, B, D. Rather than going to the 6 or the 13, we go to the flat 6, E flat, and it gives us just that interesting sound. So before you even mess around with where to apply this, how to apply this, you want to just start by thinking, can I freely improvise in this scale and create some little melodies? I particularly think there are some really interesting shapes when you think about a G triad or sort of G triad ideas with the addition of that flat 6. That's the sound. Now, why do we apply this to F? Those can seem like they're very disparate keys. If we think about that scale and compare it to the key of F, we get some really interesting notes. We get all the extensions. The G is the 2nd, the A is the 3rd, the B natural is the sharp 11, the D is the 6, and the E flat is the flat 7. So we get sort of most of the colorful notes of the chord, and we also get the two really important notes of the third and the seventh there. That's why it's such a useful sound on this chord. Since it happens in a relatively confined space, you really have to be ready to try to plug something in there when you practice this. So I might encourage you actually to start in the second half of the song form, or the second half of the first phrase, I should say. So this example where I try to apply it musically, I'm going to start in the A flat major 7 chord. So that's actually the third phrase. You know, if you were using an app like the iReal Pro or something like that, you could loop that section to get some good practice applying those type of ideas. All right, there are 3 great practice approaches on There Will Be Another You. Now, is this my favorite tune to play at a jam session or on a gig? No, not really, in all honesty. If we're trying to play something that's swinging straight ahead in the key of E flat, I would much rather play something like It Could Happen to You, maybe My Shining Hour. I just like those melodies and those sets of chords more. They're very similar, but just a little bit different. So if this is a tune you enjoy playing or you do play often, you know, go for it. It's an important tune to know because the concepts that we practice here, 2-5-1s, thirds and sevenths, all this sort of stuff kind of apply to many other songs that we may, if you're like me, enjoy playing more. Cool. I'll see you in the woodshed.